Ourselves underway. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome everyone here today. And our first item of business, last week, Rich sent out meeting minutes for 10 meetings, January 12th, 19th, 24th, 26th, 31st, and then February 2nd, 7th, 9th, 14th, and 16th for you to look over, and would like to either have any questions or anything that you had on the minutes that we need to look at, or in the end, the idea will be entertain a motion to approve the minutes for those 10 meetings in January and February. Representative Wassinger?
I move we accept the minutes from January and February as written.
Have a motion, is there a second? Representative Burkamp, seconds. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Minutes are approved. The item that we have on the agenda today, and remind everyone that there's, after today, there's 4 meetings left. So we're going to, in those 4 meetings, try to get through everything that we have, that couple that were blessed, one maybe that's, I think there may be 4 to 5 bills that we'll look at. So we'll do those in the last 4 meetings. But today, I thought we'd start out, since we're a Rural Development Committee, that we will be nice to catch up. We had an offer of a presentation on rural broadband from Ideatech, and thought that that would be a good one to work into, since we were at a point that really didn't know what bills were going to make the way to us, so no planning last week on this. So I thought this would be a good introduction to what's been going on in rural broadband for this side of our committee. And I'd like to thank Jessica Lucas for helping set this up for us. And the presentation is by Ideatech. And I think maybe Mr. Friesen is not here today. Is that correct? But Jade, and I'm not sure how all the name goes, last name Carvalho, I believe, but if it matches a professor that was at Independence Community College, it's Carvalho.
Members of the committee, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about the current state of broadband in Kansas and some of the things that Ideatech is doing to bridge digital divides in the rural area. Can you hear me okay?
Jade, could you pull it a little closer to you so
Sure.
we know
that better?
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, we know that everyone in the world that's watching on this today, and there are many,
Yes,
will hear you.
Stimulating committee. Well, as you know, broadband is a top priority among policymakers and constituents alike, and I'll skip a lot of platitudes about how important it is, because I think the pandemic really laid bare how essential broadband is for everyone's full participation in the economy and for communities to thrive. But I did want to take just a few minutes to familiarize this committee with some of the things that Ideatech has done and our recent expansion efforts, and then offer some policy recommendations to ensure future investments will bring economic growth, innovation, and competitiveness to Kansas. So Ideatech is a Kansas-owned and operated internet provider with a mission to bring internet freedom to underserved homes and businesses in our state. We were founded in 1999 by a few Buhler High School students as part of their senior project, and they were interested in bringing technology services to their rural community. And we now have more than 120 employees, and we're headquartered in the rural community of Buhler, Kansas, in the south central part of the state. Ideatech is a competitive provider of both broadband and voice services that does not receive funding from the Kansas Universal Service Fund, so we're a little bit different than RLEX. With mostly private funding, we have built more than 4,000 miles of fiber throughout Kansas, providing broadband to thousands of customers in nearly 50 communities. In 2020, Ideatech was competitively awarded emergency response grants from the Kansas Office of Broadband, And that funding, combined with our own capital, deployed more than 350 miles of fiber using over 100,000 man-hours in the span of just 4 months. And I know, Representative Baker, you were really supportive of our efforts in Chase County, so thank you for that. Through this investment, Ideatech was able to fix decades-long internet accessibility issues for nearly 13,000 homes and businesses across 17 counties, again, in a 4-month period. And we feel that this example of expedited broadband deployments really shows the power of relaxing regulations and fast-tracking application processes and giving innovative companies like ours the opportunity to access grant funds to get the job done. While Kansas was ranked in the bottom 10 states in broadband deployment just 5 years ago, today we're currently in the middle of the pack at 28th in the nation. And I think Commerce Secretary has indicated an interest in getting us in the top 10 in the next few years. So we're making progress, but Kansas can do better. We really have the opportunity to capitalize on shifts in work patterns and remote work and try to recruit some people back to these rural communities. But we can only do that by fully connecting our state. So now we need to set our sights higher and work to be among the most connected states in America. We can do this together by focusing on the following priorities. Our recommendations, number one, are to expedite broadband funding programs. We were really encouraged to see the inclusion of industry voices in the SPARK advisory committees, the connectivity committees, and we're thrilled that our founder, Daniel Friesen, who many of you will be hearing from the tax committee later, was included in that conversation. Recommendations that come out of that committee should be swiftly channeled into the creation of broadband grant programs supported by the state fiscal recovery funds and upcoming Infrastructure Act funds. Kansans without fast broadband need a solution now, and we're really behind other states in this process. Timing is important because we're competing with those other states for fiber optic cable, contractors, and equipment. So we really need to get going. And in that vein, we encourage legislators to shore up staffing in the Office of Broadband to levels similar in other states. I believe there is some money in the budget for the broadband office to take it from, I think, 1 or 2 employees to a few more, and we encourage your support of that. The Office of Broadband has done an extraordinary job of administering grant programs on a very shoestring staff. But while states around us have broadband offices with GIS specialists, in-house technical and engineering staff, and multiple grant coordinators, Kansas is trying to pull off the massive undertaking of administering hundreds of millions of dollars in grant funding with 2 staff members and the use of expensive consultants. I won't even get into Stanley Adams' departure because I'm heartbroken. He did a fantastic job, but sure that his successor will be just as successful, and we're looking forward to working with Melinda Stanley too. She's amazing over there. So again, the governor's budget does include funding for additional staffing, and we urge you to support that item to ensure programs can be rolled out quickly and efficiently and without an over-reliance on costly out-of-state consultants who have no knowledge of Kansas. We also urge you to hire needed staff now, as soon as possible, in lieu of waiting until July. Kansas must expedite its work on new broadband programs if it wants to compete in the digital age. Secondly, investing in fiber. We believe Kansas should adopt a fiber-first model for all new broadband investments by allocating 90% of available funding to fiber and the remaining 10% for alternative technologies. Fiber should be prioritized because it is a long-term solution. It's the only technology that has stood over 2 decades of bandwidth demand growth, and it's the only technology that has the potential to sustain our bandwidth needs for decades to come. It's also a durable, utility-grade investment that stimulates significant numbers of construction jobs, purchases, and transient service uses like hotel rooms and restaurant meals, all which boost sales tax revenues. The FCC's Rural Digital Opportunity Funds, RDOF, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, and other subsidies have been wasted on wireless technology that keeps our underserved communities and rural areas in an endless cycle of funding and replacement for inferior service and leaves them at a competitive disadvantage. Technologies like low Earth orbit satellites have been promising a solution for years, but it's still unavailable in Kansas, still unproven, and very costly in areas where it is available. Kansas can meet the current unprecedented broadband demand and future demands by investing once and investing wisely in fiber. That'll really set us up for the next 50 years. Also, move on from mapping. Everybody talks about the perfect map. We've talked about Kansas's digital divide for years, but we continue to hold off on programs to fix the divide in the hopes of creating the perfect map or obtaining the perfect data set. and that doesn't exist. Kansans without broadband know where the needs are. We should listen to them and target areas where businesses and residents tell us they need it, instead of basing grant decisions on arbitrary maps created from providers incentivized to game the system. Most current broadband maps are inaccurate because some providers have distorted them by over-reporting their coverage and speeds in order to maintain their monopolies. And this allows them to shield their territories from grant eligibility, keeping out competition that is willing to invest to fix the broadband divide. So either rely on actual speed test data from those who complain about poor internet service, or better yet, adopt a fiber-first approach, which I just discussed. There are existing maps, and I believe we supplied one to this committee, that accurately show where all the fiber is in Kansas and where it isn't. If we focus primarily on fiber, we remove the impossibilities and ongoing debate of a perfect map or a perfect definition of served areas, since it's nearly undisputable where fiber infrastructure exists today. And that fiber is so robust that a speed requirement is moot if fiber is the focus of deployment. So not focusing on the map or using the fiber-first approach really eliminates a significant barrier to funding decisions and allows us to move forward with investment progress. And lastly, we ask for your support in addressing unreasonable access and fee requirements for public right-of-ways and poles. We really need help with facilitating better access to public right-of-way and approval of construction permits, and asking local governments to charge fees that are based only on their actual costs. We can recount instances of localities that charged in the tens of thousands of dollars for permitting, when the intended purpose of such charges is to merely recoup the cost of administering the permits. This is an enormous hindrance to broadband deployment in those areas. I can think of one particularly egregious example when we were doing pandemic response builds, and we had a county that, I won't get into it, but some of these areas are never going to get broadband if they don't want to work with providers on, or they're going to add tens of thousands of dollars to projects. So we also continue to struggle with reasonable pole attachment access. So we ask for support of the legislature to encourage public utilities, cooperatives, and municipal pole owners to be more accommodating in support of Kansas's mission to deploy broadband. The lack of willingness to accommodate attachment requests delays expansion efforts into needed areas and pushes up cost. Again, in one of our pandemic response projects, I remember we were trying to get on some poles to get to an area where school kids couldn't do homework, and we were told by the utility we'd have to pay for the replacement of poles in order to attach to them. And the problem is very clear. Broadband is missing from many rural parts of the state because it is too expensive to construct. When governmental agencies, pole owners, and other infrastructure owners embrace a new level of flexibility and creativity in broadband deployment policies, innovative companies like Ideatech will be there to fill the need. Advancing broadband for all Kansans will require these type of partnerships between providers, policymakers, agency officials, local governments, the business community, and the public. We must be careful to avoid approaching solutions with the same lens as we have in the past. We really do have an unparalleled opportunity this year to successfully address connectivity inequities in our state with policies that are future-focused, market-based, and innovative in Synod. Ideatech is proud to be part of the solution, and we again thank you for the opportunity to speak before you and for your consideration of the policy recommendations. I'm happy to stand for any questions you might have.
Questions? Representative Wassinger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. We could have read that as well. I would rather hear how Ideatech did the Junction City area and what kind of costs you were talking about and how you went about getting that done without having all of these helps from the legislature.
Okay, so I'll tell you that why we have been successful in the past is because as a competitive local exchange carrier, we haven't had access to entitlements that a lot of the other rural companies have, so we've had to get creative on the cost reduction side instead of on the subsidy side. So we really focus on partnerships with localities, getting public support for our projects, and asking for flexibility in permitting and right-of-way access, and using just innovative techniques. We have our own in-house construction crew. We do employ contractors on larger projects as well. So we've really just focused on the cost reduction side. A lot of people say, I don't understand how you're able to do this. especially fiber in these low-density areas, but it's really just being smarter about costs. All of us wear a lot of hats at Ideatech too. I don't really know. I don't want to assign greed to why others can't do it. I just think we have a really slim operation, and that helps. Our overhead costs are a lot lower. And it really comes down to partnerships, and that's why I think these recommendations on, I wouldn't say forcing the hand, but somehow strongly encouraging communities without this service to work a little better with providers would facilitate expansion in those areas. But I do want to add, Representative, I thank you for that question, but there are still areas that are never going to be possible that are true market failures. We know that rural broadband in many areas is a market failure, and it is going to take public investment to make a viable business case. That's kind of where we're at now in that last 10% in Kansas.
If I may. No, you have to bury all fiber, is that correct? Or can you utilize electric lines, telephone lines? And
yeah, it can be a hybrid approach. Some communities do require all fiber to be built underground. So for instance, Mount Hope, tiny little town in south central Kansas, we had to do completely underground, and a lot of the newer subdivisions and some of the kind of ex-urban areas around Wichita require that. But typically it's less expensive to go on poles. But if the utilities make it, the utilities have made it almost the same cost because they require an engineering analysis on each pole. If their poles are deteriorating, they take that as an opportunity to force the broadband providers to completely replace that pole if they want to attach to it. So there's a lot of poor, I think, practices out there that is really holding up progress on this issue. So we could go on poles if we could work better with utilities.
So then you will provide the broadband service to wherever you've done this, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Osman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in 1936, President Roosevelt introduced the Rural Electrification Act, which allowed for, grids to go in and wiring to go in underserved areas where it wasn't cost efficient. As in hearing your testimony today, are you advocating for something similar within Kansas or the United States, a Rural Broadband Act?
Well, we had, in 1996, Congress did pass the Telecommunications Act that allowed for competitive providers like us to interchange with ILECs or incumbents. So that did spur innovation and competition that lowered prices and got service out to areas that maybe weren't covered. But we're not advocating for broadband to become a utility, if that's what you're asking. I do think that there is the possibility for universal coverage if we come together and work on ways to facilitate lowering the cost, and it's really just working well together. We wouldn't recommend that. Thank you.
Representative Baker, and I see that a map is up on the screen just for you to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm glad you recognized I'm lost. So if you don't mind, I have a couple of questions. The FCC funds access, can you explain that?
Are you talking about universal service funds?
Yeah, the universal service fund.
Oh, okay, yeah. So there's a federal universal service fund, just like there's a Kansas universal service fund. However, in Kansas, those funds are entitlements to rural telcos to provide landline telephone service, $40 million a year that Kansas gives to rural incumbents to provide landline telephone service. At the federal level, that fund has been retooled to be a competitive pool for broadband in underserved areas. And so Ideatech was able to compete for some funding in rural Sedgwick and Reno County in 2018, and we were the only company in Kansas to build fiber with those funds. So I'm glad you brought this up. I wasn't really prepared to talk to it, but we would advocate for reallocating the Kansas Universal Service Fund into a competitive pool of money for broadband and service areas instead of entitlements to landline telephone providers, because we recognize, and I think like many other states who have done this, and the federal government recognizes that broadband is the communications technology of the future and not landline telephones.
So in my area, I have some national providers, and I understand one of the things people don't understand is their business model. They have a profit structure that they have to satisfy, and with our population, we don't do that. But in talking to my agriculture constituents, as broadband becomes more and more of a necessity in agriculture, running that fiber throughout those rural areas is going to be critical to the future. As we see tractors become autonomous, all kinds of farm equipment is going to be, it's big already. It's going to get a lot bigger. We have one gentleman who's gone in and put all new fences and gates and monitors in on his pastures, and that is state of the art. And it's really interesting to see how that technology is advancing way faster than we ever thought we'd see out in the Flint Hills. But in Strong City and Cottonwood Falls, you know, we're very appreciative. You took us to a situation we couldn't even do internet banking because we timed out on the dial-up before it could be completed, and that's been a great deal. The education system down there is very appreciative. And just one other little thing I want to tell you, we have the Strong City Rodeo every year, and they're looking for you on a horse down there in that parade.
Oh my
so
word. Well,
bring
I'll
your
keep
friends
saying
and come on down.
I'm definitely going to do that. Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
And you're absolutely correct. Precision agriculture is going to demand incredible levels of bandwidth. And that's why I go back to the investing in fiber. We've had so many programs on the ag side coming out of USDA that have really tried to focus on bridging these digital divides, especially in these more agricultural areas. And I feel like they've been a massive failure, because when you invest in cheap technology like fixed wireless, again, you're in this cycle of putting in a massive amount of money in. It's going to be useless in 5 to 7 years, spurring another round of investment. It's just invest and replace, invest and replace. Is fiber more expensive on the front side? It is. Maintenance costs are very low, and again, you're good for decades and decades. And so when you talk about these autonomous practices, and I know this really aligns with the IKE program and what KDOT's trying to do too, you're going to need that fiber investment. We hear a lot about LEO, low Earth orbit, or 5G, and I think what's lost in those conversations is that those all require a fiber backbone. We need more fiber in the state, and we have the opportunity with all this funding to invest wisely instead of a quick, cheap solution that we're going to have to buy again.
Representative Burkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for your testimony today and presentation. I guess I'm in Southwest Sedgwick County, so I know you guys have a couple of projects on tap down there, and I'm just still trying to learn more about this. So will the fiber be more, I assume fiber is not going to go direct to every house at the end of the day, because that's going to be too expensive. Will fiber, I mean, or is that the ultimate goal, where fiber goes to every
Fiber
house?
to the home is what we specialize in, yeah.
Because I know my parents just signed up, and they have like I think the wireless option is what they did, because I don't know what the cost was to go fiber. But so like when you're looking at rural areas, to me, the biggest issue would be like the last mile or the last 5 miles. I mean, obviously it's like a pipeline where you can get it out to Dodge City, Garden City, but then all those branches off are very expensive for 1 or 2 households. So do you think that's realistic to get fiber, I guess, to every house at the end of the day? Or is it going to be more fiber to a point and then wireless from a node?
Well, Representative, I thank you for that question, because we've thought long and hard about this. Before the pandemic, we didn't even look at wireless. And then we recognize that, okay, we need to spin these people up quickly. Now, the ultimate goal we still feel like is always going to be, we need a fiber solution. But we have used high-speed fixed wireless as a stopgap solution before we get people on the service, build a business case, and then eventually get fiber. With that being said, there may be a small percentage of people who will never have that fiber to the home service, but they should still have access to the best possible wireless. And that's why we advocate that 90-10. You know, that 10% of funding can go to alternative technologies for those very remote places. But we really think ultimately, like every other major, developed country, we should have fiber all around.
Thank you.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today in your testimony. You referenced there's about 10% you don't think you can reach.
Representative, no, I'm thinking that we're just trying to come up with we'd like you to spend 100% of your funding on fiber. I don't think that'll ever happen. But we think there will always be a small percentage of people that we should be open to using alternative technologies to reach them if fiber proves too cost prohibitive. But we think we can wire the state almost completely with fiber with the funds that are coming down the pike from the federal government.
Okay, but you referenced almost completely. What's the barrier to getting from almost completely to completely?
Yeah, so it's what Representative Bergkamp mentioned. If you have one home per mile or one home per every 3 miles, and it's going to cost you $20,000, $30,000 to run a line, but you have the option to put up a wireless tower to get to that home and maybe 4 or 5 others in the area. Maybe that's a solution. But again, I do think we could do. I think we can get to everyone with fiber with this money.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, Jade, since we have the map up there and we don't want to waste it turned into an electronic format, when you look at it, what part of the state have you brought wireless to, and how do you look going forward into the areas that you haven't been into yet?
Okay, so we actually have focused on fiber. During the pandemic, we brought a little bit of wireless service to Southwest Kansas. We wired many states or many communities like Meade and Fowler with fiber, and then those outside areas with wireless. But if you look at this map, all the green areas are the ones that have gigabit level fiber, so 1,000 megabits symmetrical. And then the blue areas would be the ones that the cable companies have, not fiber, but technology also capable of those gigabit speeds. So anything in the orange is fiber, but it's sub-gigabit. I'm not sure if there's just not the equipment on that to bring it up to that. And then the red areas are all the areas of the state that don't have fiber. It's a lot. Or don't have gigabit level speeds. And so a few years ago, I remember when we did the recommendations of, or the broadband, the Kansas Broadband Deployment Task Force did recommendations, and they were saying, we got to get everyone up to 25.3. I mean, 25.3 is where it's at. The FCC still designates that as the definition of broadband, but we now know that that's wholly inadequate, right? And so I think the reason we're pushing the technology instead of a minimum speed is because we really can't predict what those demands are going to be. We know that broadband bandwidth demands double every 3 years. They have for the last 30 years. It's like almost a law of science. And we're seeing that with what Representative Baker mentioned with all this autonomous, all the connected homes, connected through like your security system, your refrigerators on wireless, everything. These demand needs are just going to skyrocket. And so if you focus on the technology instead of the speeds, we believe that's a good way to make sure you're preparing for the future. And so anything on the map in the red is an area that is not going to have the technology necessary to safeguard it for the next few decades.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One other quick question. That dark red line there in the middle, what does that represent?
That is a great question, Representative. I am not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure.
That's the dividing line between east and west. Yeah.
That's what it looks like, but I'm not sure why that's there. We really like this map because, again, it eliminates a lot of the subjectivity. I'm not sure how familiar you are with like the map debates, but we've just, providers say, no, that area is covered. And all the people in that area may say, no, it's not. Look at my speed test. I'm getting like 10-1 service and I can't, my kid can't do their homework. And so this map, we feel it's just something people could agree on. Where is the fiber and where is it not? So we are hopeful that the Spark Broadband Advisory Committee will kind of adopt this as the map to use when they're making funding decisions, like which areas should be eligible for.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I like seeing the visual aid of the map, and here this year in the Kansas Legislature, we're very familiar with map debates.
Okay.
Representative Singer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only thing that I think is missing is I know that there are completely blacked out areas in Kansas where you get absolutely nothing. Do you have access to that map as well?
I thank you for that question, Representative. So you're familiar probably with the BAG program, the Broadband Acceleration Grant Program that came out of Ike. That was where $5 million was allocated for projects in those black areas, projects in areas with less than 25.3, $5 million each year for 3 years, and then I think it's $10 million for the next 7 years. So I would say we do not have agreement as a state on where those areas are. What we have to do is pull speed test data, because if you look at if you see providers give the FCC their coverage areas and the speeds they provide, and if you look at those maps, there are no areas like that, right? But we all know that's not the case. And so for this BAG program, what providers are forced to do is do surveys, walk door to door, have speed tests conducted by residents to prove that even though the data has been submitted saying that those areas are covered, we know they're not. So again, that's why we are really focused on, let's look at where fiber is and where fiber isn't. Because if we know where fiber isn't, we know those needs aren't met for the future. They're probably not met for today, but we're not sure. We would have to get speed test data. It really, really eases those funding decisions and eliminates a lot of the debate, which has held up progress.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Baker.
Thank you for a second time. So just kind of a follow-up on the rural areas, because I live in a pretty rural area, and we got fiber in 2008.
Wow.
And trust me, we knew we didn't need it. It was as dumb as this thing. We knew we didn't need that either. Matter of fact, go back far enough, we didn't even need a car, we had a horse. But Steve Jobs once said, people don't know what they need. It's we think we knew, but we really don't. So I will tell you, in our town, when we got fiber and everybody finally figured out that they really did need fiber, the businesses that have come into that rural area and the technology has really been unbelievable. And the surrounding towns that don't have that technology, that's become a real point of contention. And I get a lot of constituents in the rural northern part of my district that don't have service from my local Tri-County telephone provider. How are we going to help those people overcome that barrier? That's my question with, there's not a large number of population there. That's territory that has been dominated by the national carriers, and I don't really think that their business model is going to allow that to be done.
Well, Representative, I think that we should allow areas like those to be eligible for overbuilding with fiber. That's what I think. I can respect your position. I live in Hutchinson, and we're outside of Ideatech's territory, or we don't have defined territories, but they haven't built to my house yet. I'm working on it. But in Bueller, where Ideatech is, we have gigabit symmetrical service, and now I work from home, and my upload speeds are, 10 megabits, and so it should be sufficient. But a lot of times, you see the little spin on Zoom, and just as another note, in our territories where we have this fiber, we offer symmetrical 100 megabit symmetrical service for $50. In comparison, in the area where I'm at in Hutchinson, I pay $84 for 1/10 the upload speed. And so I think affordability really needs to factor into these decisions too. And if you're looking at some of these more nimble and competitive providers like ours, we're not going into these communities and building fiber and gouging them like some of the other providers. I don't want to disparage other providers because I don't know what their their business models are, but I'm just saying that we figured out a way to make it affordable too. So.
Representative Burkamp.
Thank you. Hopefully, my last question. I was at a meeting this summer, and somebody mentioned, I think that, and I'm far from an expert, so maybe you can enlighten me, but I think maybe the federal government for funding is requiring maybe 100 megabits per second for if you want funding for infrastructure. Do you think that threshold's too high? Are we overdoing it? Should it be a lower threshold? And it might be more of a federal issue than a state issue, but I wasn't sure if you had any point.
Representative, I think it's a great question because the states are going to be administering a lot of those programs, right? And so even though it's a federal decision, it definitely impacts us. And the recommendations coming out of the National Telecommunications Administration, NTIA, and FCC are that 100 symmetrical, but if unavailable, 120. And I really think, again, 100 symmetrical should be the minimum, but I really want to move away from talking about speeds because there's always a debate about what is really needed and what is not. I mean, if you're answering email and surfing the web, it's going to be a different question than if you're on Zoom calls all day. But if you focus on the technology instead of the speed debates have been as bad as the map debates, like what's broadband and what's good and what's bad. But again, fiber will get us to 1 gigabit, 10 gigabit, 50 gigabit. So what you do with fiber is you invest once, it's costly, you get the infrastructure in there, and then it's so scalable that you just take off the equipment on the ends, plop on new equipment, which is less than 5-10% of the infrastructure costs, and you're good for another 10 years. Yeah, and so it's a much more prudent investment than what we've been doing. And I feel like you provided a letter for our bag application. So in Sedgwick.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for doing that. I know it was oversubscribed by 10 to 1, so I'm not sure where we're at on that, but looking forward to getting an answer.
Let me ask a question. When you go to look at another community or a new area that you want to go to, what are the biggest issues that you have to deal with? Other providers? I mean, I know that in my area, AT&T doesn't have good service, but that's who it is. The cable company has it, and U.S. Cellular just put in fiber with, I suppose, the poles they have the little equipment on or the wireless things going out. But what do you have getting an agreement worked out with the cities for right-of-way? How much they want to charge you for right-of-way, and anything with the other providers? I mean, what's the hindrance to carrying it out?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So traditionally we'll go in and we'll get a franchise agreement, which by statute we are, they pretty much have to give us a franchise agreement. And those fees for right-of-way access are capped at 5% by state statute. And so obtaining the franchise agreement is typically not onerous. If we have a municipally owned utility, we actually prefer that because they're a lot easier to deal with than these state-sanctioned monopoly utilities that will remain unnamed. But I think the bigger hindrance we've had is on the county side, and in some of these counties that are like, well, we had one county during the CARES Act deployments, the pandemic response deployments, that charged, it added like $25,000 to the bill. They charged $500 for each road bore, $250 for each mile in right-of-way access, and $300 for each culvert, plus an application fee. And we thought it was a mistake. I remember reaching out and saying, it seems like your permitting fee structure is a little bit different than all the other counties we deal with. And they're like, nope, that's what it is. You got to pay it. And I think those are the type of things we need to look at is, people in those areas are never going to get broadband if that's the posture that these counties are taking. So it's been pretty easy to deal with the franchise agreement side, but some of the right-of-way access and the pole access it's just been really huge hindrance.
Other questions?
No?
It
Well,
looks
I
like-
thank you so much, Chairman and committee members, for allowing me to present today, and look forward to working with you to fix the state's broadband gaps.
Well, we appreciate you being able to fit us in today and give us some information on what, when you go around I think any type of meeting I've had or any discussion on what it's going to take for rural to turn things around, broadband is near the top of the list if it's not at the top. So appreciate finding out a little bit more about it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, one of those few remaining bipartisan issues. We like to be on that side. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, anyone else have anything for the good of the committee today? We will, this will be our last kind of free meeting. The rest of it, we've got four meetings to really go, and we could, at any of those meetings, depend on how we do, be having a vote. So to move some things out as quickly as possible so we can get them out before they get mixed in with a lot of other things that will happen and float down to the, I guess they won't sink down to the bottom. And so we want to try to get things out as quick as we can. So right now, afterwards, then again, Ree and Nick, if you can stay, and we'll have a little meeting to plan those four. But other than that, we are adjourned, and we'll see you next Monday.